This episode is made possible by our generous patrons.
Welcome to the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book.
And then see the movie.
I'm James.
And I'm Luke.
And this week, we discuss the last 3 episodes of Neil Gaiman's 2019 series, Good Omens. This episode is going to be one big avocado. What did you think of this line? Did you think anything of it, or how did you feel about the whole...
When does that even come up? I'm vaguely remember it. That's the as much as I remember about that line.
There's like a demon who's like replicated twice, 2 other times, basically he's the exact same demon multiple times.
It's the joke.
Right, it's the joke, and then Hastur like laughs at it.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually.
I don't get it.
Right. I mean, I don't get it either. I just thought it was funny that he didn't laugh at it and murdered like 2 people and then laughed at it.
Yeah, that was one of those cool added scenes, which we definitely get a bunch of those throughout these last 3 episodes.
We got a lot of changes, and I think it was most of the changes were here in these last 3 episodes.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, there was some in the first 3 as well, but when you're coming towards the end of a thing, it's going to feel bigger, I think, and you're going to see, I think Martin always talks about the butterfly effect of like small changes early on in the story will lead to bigger things in the end. And I think we saw some of that, like some of these smaller changes leading to bigger things in the end. But yeah. I mean, they mostly worked for me. So
I think we should give our general thoughts here in a second, but I think you wanted to do some housekeeping real quick.
Yeah, so we just released 3 older episodes on our brand new YouTube channel. That's our coverage of Die Hard and the book that it was based off of that we did back in 2017 when we first started out. It was our Christmas project. Had a lot of fun with those episodes. Put them up on YouTube, so definitely check those out if you haven't listened to them before. It'd be really cool. Make sure to subscribe when you're there. And also, we wanted to announce our next official project, which is going to be Children of Men, written by P.D. James. And I know it has a movie adaptation starring Clive Owen that I have seen, but it's been a while. I remember enjoying it. Definitely excited to revisit that, especially after reading the source material. So hopefully you'll join us for that. We're going to talk about the book in a way that'll kind of give you a preview of it if you haven't read it, let you know what it's about, and you can kind of decide whether or not you're interested in checking it out or just listening to our coverage. But we'd love to have you for that.
Yeah, and we actually came to this project. We put a bunch of sci-fi projects on our Council of Inklings on Facebook, and at first we were kind of just wondering what people had interest in. And then Children of Men had the most votes, and we were like, you know what? I think it's time to do Children of Men. Which,
yeah,
you talked about it. I mean, I love the movie, so I'm looking forward to seeing the source material and watching that movie again because it's been a couple years for me now.
Yeah, and that's a project we've been thinking about doing like basically since the beginning. That's one of the projects that we've always had our eye on. So I'm excited to get to it. So yeah, hopefully you'll join us for that. But yeah, man, I want to just reflect on this project a little bit now that we're coming to the end of our coverage of it. This is our 4th episode on Good Omens. We spent 2 in the book and now 2 on the show, and maybe just some general thoughts overall before we get into the episode specific. But like, what are your general takeaways on this project?
I think it's just fun. I had a really fun time with it. I'm happy that this exists as an adaptation, and I'm glad that we were able to get the weird musings of Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman on screen, because it is very faithful, and I think that it does capture the tone, and it does create for interesting and unique TV that you're not going to get anywhere else. So I'm really happy with it. I really had a fun time with it, and you know, by the end I didn't want to see the characters go. I wanted to see more. So I think that's kind of where you want to leave characters sometimes.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and I've seen a lot of different kind of think pieces being put out there, people saying that this is a show that TV needs right now. It needed something like this, kind of like a fun apocalypse, and you know, for various reasons. And while I like a lot of like the darker, grittier stuff that we have on TV, I do think it is nice to have that contrasting, big, but you know, well-made show that is just tonally night and day from something like Chernobyl, which I'm enjoying the hell out of right now. And it's watching these 2 shows at the same time, essentially, is what I was doing this last week, is crazy, because the tonal difference is literally as far apart as you could possibly get, in my opinion. And it is cool though, because it's like a very different feeling. I can watch it for a different reason. I can go into it knowing I'm going to feel a different way. And I like that. I think it's good to have variety in our entertainment, and I like having this sort of show to go to. And I think I'm going to have to find something else to fill the role that this has had these last few weeks for me, so I can have something lighter to bounce over to when I need it.
There's certain shows that catch your attention because they're just different. And I think that we get into these rhythms where we see the same show over and over, or we see really, really dark, and we see people try to replicate shows. Like you'll see, when Game of Thrones was getting popular, we started to see a lot of people try to do Game of Thrones. And this is the kind of show that comes along every once in a while, and it's just different, and you need different. I think that it's...
And will we see imitators coming after this? Because I think it's been... I don't know. Like, I don't have the solid numbers. I'll be curious to know if you did any research into this, but it seems like this has been a pretty big success from just the buzz I've seen online, for a show that I think people didn't know how big it was going to be.
Yeah, I don't know that, because it's on a streaming platform, I don't know how much they're going to release any sort of like viewing numbers or ratings or anything. But as far as like social media engagement or, people marketing materials and stuff, it's everywhere. And I think that people are talking about it.
Especially for a show that feels very British, even though I know Neil Gaiman, lives in America and does a lot of stuff in America. It still feels very British to me. And it feels like a show that I could easily see something like this being like, oh yeah, it's huge in Britain, but like only some people watch it over here. But I don't think that's the case. I think people are watching it everywhere.
Yeah. I did want to jump back to where you were talking about Chernobyl and this show at the same time. So now I'm glad that you can now live in the horror that I felt when I was talking about when they looked down into the nuclear reactor for that little lemon drop or whatever it was down there. I was like, don't put your face near a reactor.
That was like the last straw of like recommendations I needed, was you like endorsing the show, because I'd heard so many good things that I was like, after that I was like, all right, I'm gonna watch this show now. And I'm totally with you, man. That's a nightmare-inducing show. If you're gonna watch it and you haven't finished Good Omens, save an episode of Good Omens to like cleanse your palate before you go to bed. Otherwise, you're gonna have nightmares about crazy radiation. Anyway,
it's horrible. It's horrible. So I had a little fun thing that I wanted to bring up. It was actually from the interview that you and I both listened to. You had me listen to, where, because I was really thinking about how like I love seeing Michael Sheen and David Tennant together, and I was just thinking about like how fantastic the casting was, really across the board. I loved a lot of the casting, but Neil Gaiman had this comment that I kept thinking about throughout the coverage here, and he basically said that Tennant and Sheen and himself had like a joke, or kind of, they kept saying that if there was ever a theater version of this, that Tennant and Sheen would swap roles as Aziraphale and Crowley every once in a while, which I think would be so incredible. And I actually, spoilers, we'll talk about it later, but I think I could see it. I think there's something there. I could definitely see maybe Sheen playing a darker, more Crowley type, and
yeah. Let's revisit that in a little bit here as we go, just in case I don't know if people are always going to come in having watched all of the episodes, or if they're going to listen to this in pieces. So I think let's dive into episode 4, because it sounds like we're eager to talk about episode 6. So we'll get there eventually. But if you're ready, man, I'm ready to talk episode 4.
So episode 4 is called Saturday Morning Funtime. Things that Adam has read about and been told by Anathema become true, like the Tibetan monks in an underground tunnel, the reappearance of the lost city of Atlantis, aliens arriving, and the Kraken destroying whaling ships. Aziraphale tries to convince Gabriel to prevent the war, but he refuses. Gabriel also learns Aziraphale has been consulting with Crowley. Meanwhile, Newt arrives in Tadfield. His car crashes, injuring him and causing Adam and his friends to bring him to Anathema's house to heal up. Newt reveals to her that Adam is the Antichrist. Adam starts showing signs of dark power, which worries his friends. He eventually does not allow them to leave his sight. Ligger and Hester find out Crowley lied about finding the real Antichrist and go after him. He manages to kill Ligger with holy water and trap Hester in the answering machine. Aziraphale consults the Metatron and tries to convince him to prevent the war, but he too agrees it is a good thing. Shadwell arrives in Aziraphale's bookshop, convinced he is in league with the witches and demons, and tries to exorcise him. but ends up separating him from his mortal body and sending him up to heaven. Shadwell also accidentally burns down the bookshop. I feel like that summary takes some liberties here and there, but it's a good jumping off point. So I did want to talk about the CG in the show, because there were moments of just absolute brilliance, and I think there's a lot more CG in the show than people expect or even realize. It's pretty effects heavy. It's
I mean, sometimes I think it's pretty obvious. I mean, some of it was done in a way that I felt was kind of like, we're not going for hyper real here. We're gonna have a little fun with it.
Right.
But I'd be curious to know what examples you were gonna give.
I just felt like it's very clearly a series budget, like a TV show budget, or at least maybe not even budget, but time constraint, because they have to work, the amount of time that the effects departments get to work on these shows is so much less than something you see in like a film, like the films that go into theaters and big blockbusters and stuff. So you kind of have to take a lot of the CG with a grain of salt, and that's why I feel like when it's great, it's amazing that it's even pulled off. I think, for instance, like I thought Satan looked really, really great.
I agree.
But like, you know, a lot of these other things that happened, like the Kraken, I thought looked really good. There were, you know, there were a couple shots here and there that I felt like were like, you know, clearly a TV CG, but the aliens were a little wonky. Like the ship was a little wonky here and there.
Well, it was made to look like that model that was in his bedroom, Adam's bedroom.
And yeah, that's another. It could be a stylistic choice as well.
Yeah, I wanted to take a moment and say something that's going to make me sound stupid. Just because I feel like I often say things that, you know, maybe make me sound smart on the show, but I'm going to do the opposite now. Watching the show, I mean, why not? Watching the show, I realized that somehow in the book, I didn't put two and two together that the aliens were there because of Adam.
Right. That's what I was talking about in the episode. Like they came down and said, like, although you're messing up the planet, we're here with like a peace treaty type thing.
Yeah.
And that was like that was his influence on it, right?
Yeah, which totally makes sense, and I'm sure is definitely true in the book. I just didn't think about it that way, and I don't know why. Because in retrospect, it's a really like duh moment. Like, of course, that's what was happening. But yeah, I don't know. Just, you know, even thinking about this stuff and reading it closely, I still missed something like that the first time around. So I am fallible.
You're human. I mean, what do you want, man?
I'll lay it out there. Maybe other people had similar things that they maybe didn't realize, and the show sort of illuminated it for them.
To go down that path, then does that? So you just kind of thought that like aliens came down in general, like you didn't think anything weird about it?
I don't know, man. It sounds really dumb when you say it that way now, but I guess that's what I thought, that aliens just showed up. Well, because they could be like a cosmic force that showed up because some crazy shit was going down on Earth, and they came in to like investigate it. And that's what I kind of thought. I don't know why I didn't realize that. Of course, Adam's the one who essentially created them and summoned them. Man,
I mean,
yeah.
How did you think they looked once they pulled those helmets off?
It was funny. You know, it was played for like kind of ridiculous, like looking. I don't know. So I think it was fine.
Something it does remind me a lot of is some of the effects that end up in a show like Doctor Who. So I'm like, it doesn't bother me really that much, but I've seen people online talking about the CG, and I just think it's good to bring up the fact that like they're under such a time constraint, and the fact that they're able to pull off some amazing effects that you couldn't differentiate from like a film is pretty impossible to like the fact that exists.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mixed bag, right? Like there are some times where it looks really, really good, and there's other times where it looks very TV, very, very, you know, lower budget. So.
And I mean, I think people don't realize also that like the effects department would be the first people to tell you like, oh, we could have made that look better. You know what I mean? It's just
given the
time. The time. You just don't have the time.
So one thing I did notice I thought was pretty cool in the show, and you know, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about this, but there was a little wing on the side of the messenger's truck that he drives around, or whatever you call that, when he's delivering these packages. And I thought the little wing to me was reminiscent of Apollo, like the messenger of the gods and the winged sandals kind of deal. And so I thought maybe they were trying to make a reference to that. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I can totally see that. I didn't make that connection, but I totally get that. I mean, it makes sense too because he's clearly a messenger.
Right. And shout out to Simon Morels, by the way, the actor who plays the delivery man. He liked our tweet about our last episode, so that was cool. And shout out to Douglas McKinnon as well, who actually retweeted that tweet. So it's really cool to get some interaction with some of the people who actually made this show, and we appreciate that. And hopefully we get a few people who are checking out our show because of it.
So I wanted to talk about we talked about in our coverage maybe last episode when that Neil Gaiman talked about how he wanted to bring in some of the outside elements that weren't in the books, mainly the stuff going on with the bureaucratic side of heaven and hell, some of those characters, and getting more of Gabriel and more of Beelzebub, and seeing a lot of hell, which I also wanted to mention, the fact that hell is like the DMV, like a bureaucratic office space, and it's just like dingy and wet, and like everybody looks gross. That's a really fun depiction of hell, and I think a lot more palatable in a comedy than like burning lakes of fire and stuff.
Yeah, and honestly, it's weird because I feel like Satan doesn't feel like he fits in that in that world they've set up. He feels like he's that more like quintessential classic version of Satan. Instead of like a person version of Satan, which I don't know, could have been interesting.
If just like Benedict Cumberbatch walked out.
Yeah, there you go.
But I think it's cool to also see like I said, I think that Satan looked really good. I think that was one of the parts that I was like, wow, they really made sure that Satan looked cool.
Yeah, and it's funny because I remember when I saw him in the trailer, I wasn't that taken with how he looked. But I felt like in the show he actually looked better, and I don't know if they did like an additional touch up to it, or if it was just like a certain frame or two of it looked a little off, but then other frames looked better, like when he's actually talking to them. I don't know what it was, but for whatever reason, I liked it better in the final episode. But we're still getting ahead of ourselves, so we should focus on this episode. So this is where a big part of this episode is where Anathema and Newt are connecting, and then they are getting ready to go out and do something, and then like the apocalypse is hitting. We get a storm. We get the scene where they're holding onto the door and like flying in the air. Go inside, have sex, and this is something out of the book. And I just want to know, like, what did you think of this scene, and how did it play on screen for you?
I don't think there's any way that this scene couldn't have been like a little awkward. And just in general, I feel like I guess I wanted to start by saying like the first 3 episodes I felt were really, really strong. I felt like they were setting up characters that we understood and were getting connected to. And then I think that these last 3 episodes suffered from us not being quite connected enough to the characters. And it felt like if I had some more attachment to Newt, and it just all happens very quickly. And I know that that's how it is in the book, but I don't know. It was definitely an awkward scene, and it was in the book, so I know they had to do it, but it was just, I don't know. It wasn't really that funny. It seemed like really awkward to me, and like it seemed weird because it was like a prophecy. So, but again, a lot of that's from the book.
Yeah, I'm honestly, I'm kind of relieved to hear that you also thought it was a little odd. Because, I mean, like, you can always go with the defense of, like, well, it's in the book, so it should be there that way. But I don't think that is, necessarily something that has to be there. Now, on the other hand, this is a show that's lighter. It's about, in some ways, it's about humanity and romance and connection. And they wanted to introduce this romantic subplot for these 2 characters that we see pays off at the end with them, the Anathema choosing to reject the prophecies and so forth. But like you said, I think there wasn't maybe enough time to get invested with them. Or maybe it wasn't, I don't know, because it could also just be the way the characters were portrayed. I don't know, like I never really liked Newt enough to feel that connected to him. He was always just kind of okay to me. And I think there was still a bit of that, because I was starting to talk about this last episode with like the having him quote unquote looking better. But the more I think about it, he's not really that good looking. Like, I don't know. I don't know who was saying that online. I'm not saying the guy is bad looking. He's not like a model, right? Like, he's not some devilishly handsome actor, in my opinion. And so it still feels a bit like wish fulfillment to me. Like male wish fulfillment, get to hook up with the sexy witch, right? And that's how it felt in the book, and that's kind of how it felt in the show as well. And I don't know, I guess I kind of hoped they might play that differently, and I was almost a little disappointed to see it played out essentially just like it happens in the book.
Again, I just think that I don't even necessarily think, and I don't want it to seem like I'm saying that it was like the portrayals. I felt like they did a pretty good job with what they were given. I just don't know if they were really given very much to sell the relationship. And I think it just comes down to the fact that there wasn't much written in the book about it, and then so there didn't need to be that much in the show to kind of play along the same plot line and everything. And I think maybe it just didn't work quite as well as it did in the book for me. I think this kind of leads into some of the stuff that I felt with them as well. I felt like I understood who the characters were a little more in the book, and I just didn't really feel the connection or attachment, and it just, other than the scene where he's like torturing his friends, a lot of those scenes just blend together for me.
Interesting. Yeah, the Anathema and Newt thing is kind of, just to circle back to that before we get on to them and other things. It was one of my first kind of bummer moments for me watching the show, in that I didn't feel sort of like unreservedly like, oh yeah, this is all awesome. Which I came off of episode 3, which is still my favorite episode of the 6. Feeling like, man, this show's amazing and it's just going to reach new heights. And I don't know, I remember I was watching it with my wife, and she kind of was like, like this is kind of pointless. Like, why is this happening, kind of thing, when it was going on. And I kind of felt the same way. Like this, it just felt unnecessary. And I don't know, maybe that's callous of me. And maybe it's like, yeah, why not? It just have some romance, and it can be fun, and it can be, semi-romantic or whatever. And that's a good thing. And there's nothing wrong with it. And like, I don't like to say, it's not like I hated it. I don't know, it just kind of fell a little flat, I guess.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. And you actually just reminded me of something. I think maybe what it is for me, as funny as it's supposed to be, the sex scene, it's a pretty long, drawn out joke. Her head is like revealed from under the bed, and then he's revealed from under the bed, and they're both like, I think it's just like a really long joke that...
It gets kind of cartoony.
Yeah, I think it was just a little too much. And maybe if it was more subtle, you would be like, their relationship would seem more real or more like intimate, but it just felt like it was just all a joke to me.
Right. Maybe that joke plays better in a book.
And that's not to say that I hated it. I just think that I was like, I kind of wish that there was a little more something there.
So let's move on from that. There was a lot of good. There's a lot of good. There is we get Shadwell coming to the bookstore, and that plays out in much the same fashion. Aziraphale actually says, "Oh fuck," gets pulled up into heaven,
which is such a funny, like, it works so well in the book, so well in the show as well. So funny to hear him just say, "Oh fuck," and then he just gets shot away. I think it's like the very end of the episode, right?
And it is funny because it, just like in the book, it kind of stands out because this doesn't feel like a show that's going to have F-bombs. And we get a couple of them, because we get another one later. It's like, it's kind of shocking when you hear them, like, oh damn. And it's because it's like, it's on Amazon Prime, they can do whatever the fuck they want. They don't, you know what I mean? Like, they can have PG-13 for all of it and then hit you with that. Why not?
I also did want to mention, we skipped a couple of things I wanted to talk about. Nick Offerman showed back up with his son Warlock, and they were like, when Hastur thought that this was the Antichrist.
Yeah, and I kind of liked a lot of the Hastur added stuff. So in this one, they have the interaction where he spills the holy water on Ligger, killing him, and then they jump into the phone line. They kind of digitize in a way that I thought looked pretty cool. And it was definitely over the top, but I thought like that all looked pretty good to me. As much as you can imagine a demon getting sucked into a telephone.
No, I think that all worked well for me. And I like the update from the phone line into like the digital world rather than it being, the chase through the phone line in the book.
Right, that's true.
The Ligger death was pretty good looking too, right? He like folded in on himself, like melted. Yeah, pretty crazy looking. There's a scene where Crowley like runs up on Aziraphale, and he's like, "We can still get out of here. We can just jet off to whatever, I forget what galaxy or he kept talking about a specific galaxy, and he's like, we can just head off there." And they very much leaned into the relationship again, which I've seen a lot of people talking online about, and I just think it's so fun to like let it be what people want it to be. I think that was such a good choice on their part, whether people want it to be platonic or whether people want it to be a relationship. I like that it did lean in more than the book, so that lend some credence there. But it's just, I like it. It's not like bashing you over the head with any sort of with either way. I just think that's really nice.
Yeah, I mean, I can see the argument. I can see people saying like, this was an opportunity to have representation in this sort of relationship, and try and normalize it. And I agree that is a worthwhile pursuit. And I'm not saying that this show's immune to that sort of criticism. But I do think that it's sort of like we talked about, like it's trying to play it both ways. It's trying to say like, if you want this to be platonic and you want it to be non-romantic, it can be. And if you want it to be a relationship, a sexual relationship between two men or a loving relationship between two men, it can be that too. And I think you're going to lose some people by trying to play it both ways, right? Like it's just going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, that is true. Like the safer path isn't always what people are interested in. But I mean, if we're being honest, my I mean, I fall in the category of people who just think that they love each other, like genuinely are in a romantic relationship because of the show. Like that's the camp that I land in, and the fact that they left it open, you know, maybe it was like the broad way to do it, but I felt like they were in a relationship by the end. So,
well, and I think also, in Neil Gaiman's defense, I think he fell back on what made sense for the world and the characters he created, and him and Terry Pratchett created, and they made these angels and demons sexless, in that way incapable of having a true romantic relationship in the way that humans think of it, right?
but I mean, even so, they clearly have a relationship, whether it's sexual or, you know.
So it's like they have as much as they can without maybe the sexual nature of it that they would have if they were actually human. And I guess that's the distinction. Is like that's the one thing that keeps them from being truly human, and then maybe also keeps them from having that like true human relationship. I mean, instead they have a unique sort of romantic / platonic romance throughout the ages that has a certain tension to it, because both of them clearly have feelings for each other that maybe they don't know how to express or feel like they can't express because of who they are. And to me, it's like he just leaned into that. Ultimately, it wasn't like he invented that for the show because he was like, "Oh, I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea, so I'm going to invent this thing." Like that was always there from the origin of this idea. And so I think that when it came time to make a decision on like how we're going to play this, we're just going to play it how it was in the book and how it was originally conceived. And so to me, you know, I'm not saying anybody's wrong who you know wishes that it was a different way, but it worked well for me. And you know, take that with a huge grain of salt, because obviously, you know, straight white guy, so I'm the kind of person that it would play well for. So of course,
at the end of the day, like I think like you said, Neil Gaiman would come down and say that their relationship can't be described in any sort of way that we perceive it, because they are like angelic beings that are beyond human understanding in some ways. So I think that's kind of what he would say about the subject.
Yeah,
but,
and
you know.
and the romance we do see is their humanity coming through, right? So like I feel like there has to be sort of this tension between the human and the angelic within their beings, in my opinion.
Which leads me to something that's in the next episode, but I did want to say, God at one point says that Crowley has something that no other demon has, and that's an imagination. And we can talk about like what that does for him, and I want to talk about why he has an imagination when other demons don't. Okay. Last couple of things I want to talk about in this episode is, did you enjoy the joke with where God was talking about how many angels can stand on the head of a pin, and then or dance on the head of a pin, and then saying like angels don't actually dance, but Aziraphale is one angel who does.
Yeah, and that's another example of Aziraphale and Crowley being special, right? Being different and truly having gone native and adapting human things. And also, we just got an awesome scene of Aziraphale dancing, which is really funny.
And then God mentions that demons do dance, and we see Crowley, like the 1970s Crowley, like dancing around and stuff. Yeah.
Doing disco and stuff. Yeah. It was so good.
It's good.
Man, and whenever we got any of those, like, time flashes, different costumes, different over-the-top behaviors like that, I mean, that's like what I loved the most about episode 3, and then whenever we got any more of that, I was always so into it.
Yeah, it's really good stuff. And yeah, we talked about Aziraphale communing with Metatron, and he falls into the portal. Oh, I did. All right, last thing in the episode. Sorry, this is the very last one. Crowley goes into a movie. He's in a movie at one point, and it's like a claymation movie. And the demon Hastur like takes over the movie and starts like rips the rabbit's head off or whatever. The shot like zooms in on Crowley while he's out in the crowd, and there's one other person in the crowd, and that's a Neil Gaiman cameo. He's like all slumped over, like he's asleep in the movie.
Yeah, I caught that too, or I saw somebody post on Twitter about it, so I was looking for it. Yeah, it's good stuff, and definitely a cool way to kind of just put himself in the show. Loved it.
So episode 5 is called The Doomsday Option. Crowley becomes deeply distraught to find Aziraphale's bookshop in flames and no sign of him, leading him to believe he lost his best friend. Aziraphale is discorporated from his physical body. He is able to tell Crowley that he placed information about the Antichrist in Agnes Nutter's book, which Crowley salvaged from the bookshop. Aziraphale co-inhabits Madame Tracy's body. With Shadwell, they head to the military base in Tadfield to meet with Crowley. Hastur escapes from the answering machine and teleports into Crowley's car, that he drives through a fire, causing Hastur to be incinerated. Adam comes into his powers, but he frightens off his friends. Upset over his friends leaving him, Adam comes back to himself. He and his friends also head to the military base. At the base, the four horsemen have taken over the communications hub from which they gain control of all the world systems. Crowley catches up to Shadwell and Madame Tracy at the base.
Hastur has all these cool scenes where he comes back, and he's done a lot more in the show, and then he comes back and he does, there's the whole maggot scene, right? Mm-hmm. Which it was cool to actually get that in the show and see what that looks like. And he kills a room full of people, and he's angry, and he's back. And then I felt like it was kind of anticlimactic that he pops into the car, doesn't seem to be able to really do anything, and then just gets burned up. And like, I get why it makes sense. It just it felt like they'd built up Hastur to be a lot more badass in the show than he ended up being.
It's interesting though, because he just like goes back to hell, whereas Ligger died from the holy water, you would think.
Yeah, well, I think he just gets discorporated maybe, and whereas Ligger, if you get the holy water on you, it's like legit extinction regardless. So I assume that's what happened.
At the very beginning of the episode, the "Somebody to Love" song by Queen, when he's like racing in his car, he's like pissed, and and Crowley like gets out and he runs into the fire. That song playing while he's thinking he lost his friend, or in my eyes, lover, someone to love. Like it's again on the nose a little bit, but it's like that was a powerful moment. And I think like David Tennant really sold that scene with the way that he was like, "You bastards, you killed my friend," and like he's just so upset, and it's just everything's burning down around him. He finds the Agnes Nutter's book, and he walks out of the flaming building, and it's just like, that was a really strong, and it's mostly from the book, but really, really strong performance and really strong scene, and only made better by that Queen song.
I did want to say, I pointed out on my personal Instagram that I took a screen, not really a screen cap, I just took a picture of my screen with my phone. Crowley drinking Talisker. I don't know if did you see that I posted that to Instagram?
I didn't know. That's pretty cool though.
Yeah, so there's a part where he's in the bar and he's drank a whole bottle, and then he gets a second bottle and he starts drinking that, and then Aziraphale shows up. And I was at one point I was able to stop it, and you could see Talisker, and then like it cuts the R off, but I was like, okay, so he's drinking Talisker, which is a scotch that I rather love. So I was commending him on his good taste.
Could you get a good read on like the year and everything?
Yeah, I think it was the 10 year, which is their flagship, their main expression that you see a lot of places. So
that's cool. So it's like something that people have had before, and you've probably had before.
Yeah, I've had. Yep,
that's cool.
I've had a couple of bottles. It's good stuff. If you want to drink like Crowley, drink Talisker 10 year. Can they sponsor the podcast? I hope so. Send us money. Crazy. Don't send us money. Just send us a bottle of Talisker. That's all I want.
Yeah, I'll take a bottle. Yeah,
I'll talk about it on every episode.
I haven't had any, so I'd like to compare it to the other scotch that I have had. So in that scene, he gets pretty drunk. And by the way, if you want to be like Crowley, maybe drink Talisker, but also get a pair of those sweet sunglasses.
Yeah, so he definitely is like really distraught over, they killed my best friend and all that stuff, right? Like Crowley's kind of like a diva, right? Like he's very like, he wears his emotions on his sleeve. He's very kind of intense with that.
I've seen a lot of people draw comparisons to Crowley being like, like this rock star, like like that it's a very like rock star vibe. And I think that he latched onto that in Humanity, and he like saw a lot of what he liked. And yeah, there's a lot of that, rock stars are known to be divas and emotional, but also, cool in other situations, the coolest person in the room and all that kind of stuff. So I think it worked really well for the character.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
We don't get the scene with Aziraphale jumping into all the bodies.
Yeah,
all the different.
We had a lot of fun with that in the book. I was a little bummed to not get some of those classic.
I just wanted
parts,
I just wanted the one televangelist.
Yeah, but they just kind of changed the way that played out. He was able to look at the globe when he was on the other side and go directly to England, so it wouldn't have made sense really for him to be popping around into them. I don't know. They just changed it, And I was kind of sad to not see that scene because I thought it would have been really funny, but what we got was good. No real complaints about it.
How did you feel about the Madame Tracy seance?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was similar to some other scenes in that it was mostly good. Parts of it maybe went on a little too long, or were I don't know. It's like, as much as we like these characters, Madame Tracy and Shadwell, to me, both started to wear thin the longer the show went on. And I started to become less interested in them. And I don't remember having this problem in the book. But on the show, it was like I wanted to spend more time with Crowley and Aziraphale, and that's what I'm trying to say. Like, it's not really as much that I definitely dislike these characters. It was like I like them okay, but like I want to spend more time with Crowley and Aziraphale, because they're the ones I'm really here for.
And I think that's what it really comes down to is like we got so attached to Aziraphale and Crowley and the performances that were being pulled off. It was just like, God, I want more of that. And I guess to kind of counter your point a little bit, I thought that Madame Tracy was a high point of the show for sure.
Okay.
I really, really loved the going back and forth, specifically when she was given the Aziraphale and the Madame Tracy stuff to do. So funny, and I thought, again, a high point. She seemed so familiar to me in the first couple episodes that we saw her, and then around this time it clicked for me, and I was like, that's Rita Skeeter from Harry Potter. And it totally is. Who's cool. Like she first shows up as Rita Skeeter in Goblet of Fire, I believe, and she's like the media journalist who's like always digging to try to get like the really shallow pieces on all the characters and stuff.
I'm such a bad Harry Potter fan, I barely remember this character at all. So we'll get to it eventually.
Yeah, she's a bigger deal in the book, but
okay.
She shows up a few times in the movies. But so Miranda Richardson is who plays Rita Skeeter in Harry Potter, and then Madame Tracy in this show. I just thought she was a high point. I actually liked her more than I liked Shadwell, for sure.
Okay, so I'm going to amend what I said a little bit, because I actually do agree that I did like her, and I think it was particularly the seance scene itself. While there was definitely some funny highlights, there was a part where I think she was talking with this other voice, and it kind of just went on a little longer than I expected. But ultimately, you're right. I did really like her performance. I think it was more Shadwell, which is funny because I really like Michael McKean. I think he did a great job in like Better Call Saul. Incredible job. He's a great actor. Mm-hmm. But it felt like he sort of had a one-note finger joke thing that he was doing, and a certain look he would give, and the nipples thing, and like it was funny, but I don't know, for whatever reason, maybe it's because I read the book leading up to the show. That those jokes just started to wear on me a little bit as it went on. It was like it was too one note. I wanted either more from him or less from him.
I wanted a little more from him, and I don't even like you say, I don't know if it's necessarily the performance or just the material given. I think it's probably more the material given, but yeah. I think it was just more time that could have been dedicated towards Crowley and Aziraphale is probably the reason why I mostly wasn't really invested in his character.
So I want to talk about one omission that I guess I kind of understand why they did it, but I sorely missed it. And that was the 4 other horsemen of the apocalypse.
Yeah.
Completely absent from the show. That was one of our like favorite bits from the book that we both laughed at quite a bit. We get none of that, and I was kind of sad. And then honestly, that kind of relates to an overall slight disappointment I had with the 4 horsemen in the show. While I mostly liked them, and I liked Death a lot, especially their final showdown, I think in the next episode, there was I had some things that I was a little disappointed with how the horsemen ended up being on the screen.
Yeah, I mean that was definitely one of my points. I was
okay.
It's to me I was a little more disappointed, I think, than what you were just saying. I just felt like again, I wasn't invested in the characters at all, and also they were just underwhelming. They didn't seem all that powerful. They did a couple things here and there. I thought that their introductions were probably their strongest parts, and then everything beyond that started to get really I think it started to become hard for them to show their power or be intimidating. And like you said, the introduction of Death, like I think it worked. I think it did work for me ultimately. And the scene where he leaves, the fact that we get the actual like God giving the actual narration from the book. I wanted this because you really like that from the book. Opens his black wings and there's stars.
Yeah,
the things that
we're getting in the next episode, by the way. But yeah,
we'll talk about it, I guess, in a second. But I just thought that was a cool part that they also brought back. And yeah, Death overall. I think the mask was creepy looking for sure. But again, I think all 4 horsemen for me weren't that intimidating.
I like the way he spoke too. I thought they did a good job of nailing that like the sound of Death. To me, he was the strongest of the 4, I guess.
I agree with that. Yeah.
So I wanted to mention I had been wondering, where did I know the actor who plays War from? Because they seem so familiar to me. And then I finally remembered where I know her from. Her name's Muriel Enos. I'm probably mispronouncing the last name. And she was in The Killing, which I don't know if you saw any of that show.
No, I've never seen that one.
Yeah, it's a pretty good show. I mean, up and down, has some off seasons, but ultimately a pretty good show. And she's it's like a cop procedural, similar to like an American Broadchurch, and that it's about like one crime and it takes place over a full season.
Yeah, I'm aware of it. Like I've seen trailers and stuff. I know what the idea behind it is. I just haven't ever sat down. There was another one that came out. You said that was The Following?
No, that was The Killing, not The Following. The Following is the one with like Kevin Bacon, right?
The Following and The Killing came out around the same time, and like I kept getting those two mixed up a lot.
Yeah,
clearly.
Anyway, I just want to say, like, I know she can be great. She's been in some stuff that I really enjoyed, but the war performance just continued to not land for me. And there was a couple of kind of cool looks, but then it felt like she was getting a little bit too, I don't know, like glam towards the end, and like, and then kind of there was a part where she was just spinning around with a sword for no reason for way too long. And then she gets kicked in the shin and drops it. And it's just like, this is supposed to be literally the incarnate of war. And it just, like, I know it's a funny show and it's played for laughs, but I felt like they walked the line better in the book of these four horsemen being genuinely powerful, scary beings who just are unable to, face Adam down. Whereas in the show, it felt like they're really not that scary. I don't know.
And it might be one of those things where it was like within the production of a show, you're like, where do you want to put your resources? Do you want to put your resources in your main characters or these side characters? And I think maybe they were like, let's make sacrifices here to make sure that these other areas are really solid and work really well. I also feel like we keep talking about negative things. So I think we've said the things that I think that I was down on. And I think that from here on, I just want to talk about good things because I like the show a lot, and I worry that it doesn't sound like that.
Yeah, I agree.
Overall, the scene where Adam is forcing his friends to not run, I thought was really strong for all of those characters because it was like genuinely more scary than anything that the Four Horsemen did. He's like forcing people to not move, taking their mouths away.
Yeah, whenever I see a character who has no more lips, like that's always terrifying.
Yeah, what about the smile? Those creepy like Joker smiles. Like all of that was really working for me, and Adam was way more sinister. He was almost more Antichrist than he was in the book to me. I felt like he was like up flying in the air, causing crazy like storms, and I mean, I guess he did cause a storm in the book as well, but you know what I mean. He's like physically everything around him is changing, and he does it for a couple of episodes, so I feel like it felt longer. Like he was kind of in the Antichrist form for a lot longer.
Whereas it resolved much quicker in the book. I agree with that. So yeah, I mean, speaking of that, one of the things my wife noticed, Annalisa, she noticed that Pepper from Them, she wears red throughout, and noticed that could be like a visual cue that she's going to end up taking on War, right? Who was always wearing red. Yeah, so I thought that was kind of interesting, even though, like, I don't know, that was more of a thing in the book, I guess. We did see it happen in the show, but is that something you picked up on?
No, not really. But I definitely didn't get the color motif thing, but I felt like Adam and Them were kind of their own Four Horsemen, and I felt like it was kind of in the book as well, where it's like,
oh yeah, for sure,
the kids were kind of the antithesis to what each of the horsemen represented, and so like she went up against War, and I felt like it was like kind of like their own sort of horsemen.
So when they arrive at the airbase, I don't know, you probably saw this, but the guard is reading American Gods by Neil Gaiman, which I thought was a nice little shout out to himself.
Yeah, that was cool. I mean, there's a lot of people who are invested in American Gods right now because of the other show going on. So that's pretty cool.
And he's at an American airbase, so
right, exactly. You mentioned a reference and I wanted to jump it way back. There's this, I think it's in episode 4. Crowley is trying to figure out where he wants to run off to, and there's pages flying around, and there's one moment where a page is like directly behind him, and on it says Gallifrey, and Gallifrey is the home planet of the Doctor from Doctor Who. And so like the idea that like he could be going to Gallifrey is pretty awesome. And Gallifrey has its own whole like if within the universe of Doctor Who, it's a complicated place, so it's pretty funny to think that like, oh, Crowley's a demon, so you could just go to Gallifrey anytime.
Yeah, that'd be cool, man. Definitely a cool reference. You got to reference Doctor Who whenever you got Tennant in the show.
It's crazy how many actual references are in here from Doctor Who. I was really surprised at the number. I thought 1 or 2 here and there, but there's a lot.
Yeah.
the horsemen, when they get to the base, they like create this virus and they start flipping all the switches and all the nuclear warheads are about to fire off. And this is when Crowley, like we talked about, drove through the fire, and he's like God talks about how he has an imagination, and right now he's imagining his car not catching on fire as he or not melting, not falling apart as he goes through. And like what's the implication? Like is it because of how close he is with humanity that he's like developed an imagination, or was it part of the ineffable plan that this one demon and this one angel would kind of stray away from the pack and have their own abilities?
Well, that's the great thing about an ineffable plan. Like, we obviously can't discuss it or know, so it must have been. that could be the excuse for anything. You know?
That is the excuse, though, right? Anything that does happen was supposed to happen if there was an ineffable plan, right? Yeah. So clearly, it was supposed to happen that way. At least that's what Crowley would want you to think. That's his reasoning within the universe.
Did you see, by the way, that I think it was Merriam-Webster did the word of the day as ineffable recently?
That's so cool.
I think due to Good Omens.
I'm sure, yeah. I'm sure everybody was Googling the hell out of that word.
Yeah,
recently.
It must be, right? They see a spike in people Googling stuff and they're like, all right, we're going to make this word of the day. That's got to be a thing.
So yeah, and then really the last thing that happens is Crowley rolls up in the flaming car and reunites with Aziraphale, who's in Madame Tracy's body right now, and then they all sneak past the American guard there.
Yeah, and that was another moment we talked before about the CGI. That was one to me that, like, very clear CGI, right? The car on fire, like, but there's no way to really show a car fully engulfed in flames yet still driving just fine without it being very obvious CGI. Like, that's just how it's gonna look.
It's funny that you keyed on that one because I have some stuff here about it. The VFX supervisor here is JC DeGuara. And he said that the hardest effect to get right was the flaming car. The toughest thing about it was he's actually getting out of the car when it's on fire. So like you have a real person who has to be coming out of a flaming car, and like to do that in CG is really tough. He says in the book there's tons of references to him driving at 120 miles per hour. We had a real Bentley. It could go 30 miles per hour. Everything past that was digital. Come on, guys. It's such an impossible task.
Limitations of real life, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I thought it looked good, and that was one that I was totally willing to forgive, like, any slight sense of, like, oh, obviously this is CGI, because, like, yeah, it's just that it fit with the tone of the show to me, so it was fine.
I feel like they really pulled off some of the when he's driving around and they really punch in on his face and the flaming cars around him and stuff. Some of the shots are really stylized and cool. Like, I think they really work.
I agree. Are we ready for this last episode? Because I have a lot to say about this one.
Yeah, last episode is episode 6, the very last day of the rest of their lives. Adam uses his abilities to separate Aziraphale from Madame Tracy. Adam's friends defeat war, pollution, and famine while death takes his leave. Beelzebub and Gabriel come to Earth to have Adam start Armageddon in accordance with the Great Plan, yet Adam refuses. Aziraphale and Crowley suggest to their respective supervisors that what they want may be part of the Great Plan, but perhaps not the ineffable plan. Both sides reluctantly stand down. Satan hears of Adam's refusal from Beelzebub and comes up to Earth to destroy Adam. Adam renounces Satan as his father. Satan disintegrates just as Adam's earthly father arrives. Adam repairs the world to how it was before Armageddon started, including restoring Aziraphale's bookshop and Crowley's Bentley. Aziraphale and Crowley are tried by their respective peers for treason. They are found guilty and are sentenced to the most extreme punishment, with Aziraphale being told by Gabriel to get into the hellfire, and Crowley enters a tub filled with holy water provided by Michael. Yet, to everyone's shock, they both survive. Back on Earth, Aziraphale and Crowley switch bodies back to normal, which is why they were able to survive their sentences. Anathema is sent a continued version of Agnes Nutter's prophecies, but Newt convinces her to let go of her responsibility to follow the prophecies, and she burns them. Adam still has some of his reality warping powers while confined to his parents' property. Shadwell and Madame Tracy start a relationship. Aziraphale and Crowley finally have lunch as a nightingale sings in Berkeley Square, and God states that nobody can hear it over the traffic.
Yeah, man. So we get a lot of changes here at the end, including the whole bit about Aziraphale and Crowley getting sentenced to punishments, all added for the show. But let's back up and talk about that final confrontation and how did it end up feeling for you, and were there parts that worked, parts that maybe fell flat, anything like that?
I mean, we talked about the horsemen already. I don't feel like we need to talk about that much more. The final confrontation, I think Adam's the way that Adam deals with this is he renounces his father out and out and says, like, you were never my father, and changes reality to make it so that Satan never was his father, which I don't think was exactly explicitly stated in the book.
Right.
It was more of implied that he just like disappeared him for now, and his dad appeared. It's kind of what I got from.
And again, maybe that is the sort of subtext of the book, but they made it the plain text of the show, and that's not bad. Like, honestly, that's fine. Like, tell the story straight up. You know, sometimes that can be better. And you know, if it's something that maybe wasn't completely clear to you in the book, it can become clear in the show.
Yeah,
as we've seen has happened to me.
I think the final confrontation with that moment where I actually really liked this and laughed, and it was just a heartwarming moment for me with Aziraphale saying, like, do something or I'll never talk to you again. And Crowley like stops time. He like stands up and like screams, and like apparently he can summon pocket dimensions and like stop time.
Yeah, that was an added bit. We did get to see them with their wings, which was cool.
I love that. The wings look great every time we see them. So cool looking. And then, you know, he restarts. He like turns like a knob and it like restarts time, and then that's when he kind of takes care of Satan. Just fun. I really enjoyed that bit. A couple things I did want to say. Sorry to go back to the horsemen, but I actually it was really, really funny when Pepper kept saying, she just had like gold for lines. She said at one point War says to her, like, go home little girl, and play with your dolls or whatever. She says, like, my mom says that war is just masculine imperialism executed on a global stage. And then she says, and I think that's when she says, like, go home, little girl, and play with your dolls. And she's like, I do not endorse everyday sexism. Yeah. And like, it's just all gold coming from somebody so young to have like those whys of viewpoints, and just like slaying this lady. It's just really funny to me.
It was funny. I agree. Yeah, I mean, I don't need to harp on some of my disappointment with the Four Horsemen, but yeah, I can admit that stuff was cool for sure. Yeah, and we touched on it a little bit earlier, but we get the actual line from the book, and it was a little odd because it felt like, why is God sort of narrating this in a way? But on the other hand, it's like, that was one of my favorite lines from the book, so it was kind of cool just to get it verbatim in the show, with Death spreading his wings and the millions of lights that may have been stars or may have been something else entirely, right? Something like that. It's a great line, and it was cool to see it on screen.
Right, it's evocative, and then they also show it on screen, which is they do it justice on screen. Like, it looked cool that like it became like darkness and then star like lights and everything. It worked really well on screen. I will say I wish that this was the last time we saw Death. I kind of didn't like his little pop-up cameo that we had later. I really would have liked to have seen. I guess seeing God where we saw God, where we assumed it was God in the book, would have been weird, because right after like if we saw God and then everybody gets kidnapped, it wouldn't have really made sense. You would think God wouldn't have let that happen, maybe, or maybe know. Yeah, no, I mean that's possible. Also, like, maybe it was Death in the book and maybe we misread that part, I don't know, but regardless, I still felt like the way he leaves and says, like, I'll be back, and like all this stuff, like, I don't know, I just thought that was a better ending for that character. I didn't really need to see him pop up again just to like give a foreboding statement and then pop away. It was funny, but like, I don't know, clearly this is all very subjective, right? Like, when does a joke land for you? When does it feel like it's too much? Like, this is all going to be very subjective, and there's going to be people who are like, you know, angry with us and saying, that was hilarious, what are you talking about? And that's definitely the case, you know. Like you say, it is subjective, and I think it's a personal thing. So this is just how it was for us, and if it's different for you, we don't fault you for that. So it is what it is. So one of the things that I actually really liked, because I rewatched the final episode recently. I had watched it a few days ago, and I rewatched it again today. And in the second viewing of the final episode, I noticed it's really like they're Crowley and Aziraphale are sitting together at the bus, and Aziraphale reads the prophecy that says something about like, choose your fate wisely. Something about fire, too. Like, you're going to be playing with fire or something like that, right? And then when they're sitting at the bench, I think the last thing Crowley says is something about, like, we're going to have to choose our faces wisely here or something. And maybe that's what it said, faces or fate. I can't remember. Regardless, there's some line like that, and then the bus drives by, and that's the last we see them. And then the next time we see them, it's Aziraphale walking into the bookstore and kind of looking around, and he sees the new books on the shelf that I think were, like, children's adventure books.
And he says, "Oh, those are new." And then we see Crowley, and he walks out and he sees the car sitting there pristine, and he just kind of has like a slight smile, and then he hops in a taxi and drives away. And of course, like I'm like, oh, so they've swapped bodies. Like I get it now. And I didn't pick it up the first time because this was a whole new thing. But from that point on, they're swapped, and I started noticing little things in the performances that they were both doing to indicate that they are not actually like that this is Aziraphale in Crowley's body, and this is Crowley in Aziraphale's body, and they both played those characters slightly differently, and that goes back to the thing you were talking about with the the stage show and everything that could have worked. It was cool to see.
Exactly, yeah. That's exactly what I was talking about. Is clearly they could do it. They could play the opposite character, and it would be so much fun to see the tables turn. It'd be really interesting. I actually like, as far as this change, I really like this. I really enjoyed seeing more of the characters, and I think the swap was clever, like really clever. I didn't see it coming until it was clear, obviously, to the audience, and I think that's the best part of it is it really worked. And them swapping bodies is just, it feels right. Like it feels like something they would do. Yeah.
I'm telling you, man, go back and watch those scenes in retrospect, and you can see they're doing little things in each performance to indicate that I am actually Aziraphale or I am actually Crowley. And it's cool.
Yeah, you definitely nailed it, because I the first time I watched it, I didn't realize why. I was like, why didn't he just jump in his car? Maybe he doesn't want to use his car right now.
And it's like the way they're walking and stuff too is also different. Like Aziraphale has a bit more of that like rock star swagger, and Crowley has a bit more of that kind of like straight up and down walking that we see Aziraphale do. Like there's certain mannerisms that they adopt that I thought was really cool and worked pretty well. Without going over the top, because if they had done too much, it would have been very obvious. So they had to play it just right. Otherwise, they would have tipped their hand, and they wanted that surprise. I mean, they're obviously lucky that the sentencing ended up to be the things that they're immune to. But you can go back and say, well, Agnes Nutter gave them the prophecy, so she knew, and everything she says is right. That then they knew, and so then they were right. So that it can make sense if you sort of reverse engineer it that way.
I mean, not to mention that this is probably a punishment that they give to this is probably the highest punishment that each party gives to any of their people, kind of thing.
Maybe
when Aziraphale is getting put in the hellfire, and he's like keeps talking, and then Gabriel's like, shut your stupid mouth and die,
and hurry up and die. Yeah. And yeah, he drops the other F-bomb. He says, I'm the fucking Archangel Gabriel. And I liked it. It was cool to see that in that moment, John Hammond. Once again, it's like, it's one of those moments that you're not expecting an F-bomb to get dropped. And you're like, oh, okay. And I think it's kind of showing that, Gabriel's not a very good person. And, and really with heaven and hell both being sort of dystopian, they really are tying these two forces together and saying that these are more alike to each other than they are humanity, which is its own thing, right?
Well, and then that's kind of talked about at the very, very end,
yep,
where it's like, all of us against them, and then Aziraphale's like, wait, them against humanity, and he's like, yeah, which, the implication of that is pretty scary. It's like, how's humanity going to stand up to that?
Yeah, well, I want to touch on that at the very end of the episode. I want to talk a little bit about if we think that we could see a sequel to this.
Okay.
Because there's been some talks.
We'll save that for the very end.
Yeah, so we do get Adam and his sort of symbolic leaving of the garden and eating of the fruit. How did you feel like it played on screen?
I still liked it as much as I did in the book. I really enjoyed it. There was some stuff in the book that some extra lines that were given that to give more context, not of the event that actually happens, but just like the idea of thinking of childhood and time passing and just the reason why the forbidden fruit is worth it sometimes, and I really liked it. I think they got the message across in the show though, and I really liked that part.
And I wonder if I don't know. I felt like I got that connection more strongly in the book, but I wonder if there would be anybody who was able to watch this and not realize that they're referencing the Garden of Eden. I mean, the line about like him thinking that like there's never an apple that's not worth taking, like that's definitely pretty obvious. So I think people probably got it. But yeah, it's cool. It's cool to see this sort of play out as like a new Garden of Eden situation.
So yeah, I really liked just the reaction from heaven and hell when Aziraphale and Crowley are like surviving their punishments they're not supposed to be. And then basically they just say like, they talk to them about, they make them think like, is this part of the ineffable plan? Is this part of the great plan that they don't know about? And
right, which could be two different things.
It seems like they're going to be left alone. And then we get them on a bench together, switching bodies back. and they go to dinner together, which I think is the same thing from the book.
Mm-hmm.
And they go to dine at the Ritz.
Yep.
And then there's this whole thing that also was in the book, I believe, with a nightingale sings in Berkeley Square, but it couldn't be heard over the traffic. So even for the book, I didn't really understand the reference. I got the fact that it was like probably a song from a song or a story or something. Do you know anything about it, or did you look into it at all?
No, I don't. I don't really know what that's referencing. I assume it's also something like a song. But so what's interesting is I did note that the final song is by Tori Amos, who is a good friend of Neil Gaiman. Now, I don't know if she is covering something with that final song or if it's an original piece. I'm not really sure, because it's singing about the nightingale and all that. If anybody knows, write in and let us in on it. I'm sorry that that's not something I know off the top of my head, but I don't. I'm not sure what that's referencing.
I did look into it a little bit, and it's from a song, and it was kind of hard to like nail down where exactly it first came from, but I believe Bobby Darin is like the most popular version of it. He's a songwriter, jazz, pop, rock musician from like the 50s or so. And the lyrics here, I pulled up some of the lyrics. The important lyrics for the story are, "That certain night, the night we met, there was magic abroad in the air. There were angels dining at the Ritz, and a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square." So it kind of seems like the idea of them like dining at the Ritz and all of that ties back into like this song and this moment in time. It's cool to see like, oh, this was something that it was I believe it's like a British song originally, or at least like some sort of art or something like that. It has a long history that I'm not informed about because I'm not European. Again, like you said, if anybody knows more, I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah. If anybody could shine a little extra light on it, because clearly there's like something there we're not quite getting, and I would definitely be curious to hear that. But yeah, man, I want to talk about season 2 of Good Omens and whether or not we think it could happen. But first, we just wanted to thank a patron. Let's thank Andrew M. this week. It's been a while since we thanked him. Thank you for being a patron, and hopefully you've been enjoying this coverage. And thanks for supporting us. If you guys wanted to find out how to become a patron as well, go to patreon.com/InkToFilm, and you can find all the bonus content that we have on there, which will include our 14th bonus episode, which we will be releasing this month at some point.
Follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All of those adding to film. And if you'd like to join our Council of Inklings, we decided on our next project based on kind of interests in Children of Men. So go check that out. It's a good way to be involved in kind of maybe stuff that we'll be covering in the future. And also we post news about upcoming adaptations and other things that interest us in there.
Absolutely. Got a nice little community starting to grow there. We'd love for you to be a part of it. Also, if you'd like to help the show out, make sure to leave us a rating and a review and let us know what you thought of this episode or our coverage in general for Good Omens. We'd love to hear some feedback from you, and the best way to do that is in a rating and a review.
Thank you to Jennifer Delazana for providing our transcripts, and thank you to Music Lover for providing our intro and outro music.
All right, man. So Good Omens season 2. I've seen some talk, and what's your initial thoughts about whether or not this could actually happen?
Look, I as somebody who's a fan of these kinds of things, shows like this in general, anything that I really enjoy, I get connected to characters. I would love to see another season, but I honestly, if I'm a creative force in this, I let it lie, and I don't have another season. It was fun. This was made as an adaptation of existing material. It seems like Neil Gaiman wouldn't really be on board to showrun any longer. As much as I would love to see more of these characters, and I think there is some stuff there, it's always good to have something, just let it lie as it is, let it be this great moment in time and history and the story that we can all revisit and see as many times as we want. That's kind of where I land on it. I don't really think we need a second season.
So, that was my initial thought as well. But I've changed a little bit in the last few days, kind of thinking about it more, and rewatching the final episode. They do a lot of work to set up a potential second season here. They talk about the next big war between humanity and them, the angels and demons. Ye Saga continues with Agnes Nutter. They made sure to include that there's additional, further nice and accurate prophecies. And that was all in the book because they kind of intended to write a sequel that they never really did. But you could have easily left a lot of that out of the show to make it feel more like it was done, right? And there was not something else coming. But to me, it feels kind of like they were going, well, we'll leave the door open, and if it's really popular, maybe we bring it back. we don't know how much notes Neil Gaiman has from him and Terry Pratchett and their discussions of further books, and like how much other stuff. We know that he touched on some of it, right? That was what you saw in your research, but we don't know. There's a lot more that they had planned that was going to truly take place after the events of this novel, which you would think there would be some of that. And he could draw on that, and he could decide like it's worth doing, and if there's enough interest, and if Neil Gaiman was willing to come back and continue to show run the thing, I think it's possible, you know. And I was initially thinking like, there's no way, but I don't know, man. Like, I think this could actually happen. We could actually see a season 2.
So, I mean, I think there's a possibility that we do. I just think that I think the best things leave people wanting more. And like, I think across the board, as much as we want to double dip and as much as we want to see more of these characters, look, I love these characters. I would love to just watch like 6 hours of these characters sitting at a dining table and eating together and telling stories, and you know what I mean? I would love to see that because I love those characters, but I just think there was a template in place. Like he had written the story as it was intended there, and like you say, there was maybe a sequel in the works, but I don't know if it's like, from all I can tell, he's not interested in show running anything anymore. And I think that would be the biggest reason to not do it again. But then again, you know, enough interest and enough money gets thrown at it, somebody will show run it, and I'm sure they could get a season 2 going. I just think this is a nice miniseries that exists that I think captures a certain lightning in a bottle, a certain tone, certain style, certain couple of people coming together to create something unique. I don't know. It could happen. I just don't. I would think that they should let it lie.
Yeah, man. I mean, like I said, that was me a couple days ago, and for whatever reason, I've had a change of heart, and now I'm excited by the prospect of there potentially being, you know, another season based off of notes that never actually became a book. And what would be cool about that is it'd be going in, and it would feel kind of like an adaptation, and you would hope that it would feel authentic, but it would be something that we had never gotten before, so it would be new for everybody. I don't know, man. I'm kind of excited by the potential for it.
This is my question. Would you be worried about diminishing returns, or do you?
Of course,
like, you know what I mean. Like,
of course, yeah.
Do you think that there's any way that it lives up to the first season?
Sure, because Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett are brilliant writers, and I could totally see that they had a novel like 80% written that was never quite completed, and maybe that was actually a really fucking good novel, and maybe Neil Gaiman feels like, hey, I want to do something with this. I don't know, man. Like, I don't see any reason why it couldn't be great. But I do get the risk, and I absolutely think it could be a letdown. That absolutely could have happened. But I mean, there's everything in Hollywood is a risk to an extent, and maybe you could argue a second season off of a popular show isn't that big a risk because you're going to have a built-in audience. I don't know. I'd be interested.
If he has something like that, though, wouldn't you rather see the second book rather than the second season of the show, though? I just, like, I don't know. If there's that much of it there, then, like, why not finish the book and write it for Terry and everything?
Well, because I don't know. It feels more like publishing a book now that Terry Pratchett has passed. For whatever reason, that feels like more of a disservice to that, whereas an adaptation is different because he was never writing the show, so it'd feel more like a continuation of the show in a way. I don't know, and that's a small distinction, and that's just one I'm making off the cuff. But yeah, for whatever reason, that doesn't feel quite as weird to me as Neil Gaiman just putting out book 2 would to me.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, we'll see what the future brings. I'm not going to say no to a second season. You know, if it comes out, I'm not going to not watch it. I just, if given the personal preference, I'd rewatch the first season, and that's where I stand as of now. I'll let you know if anything changes.
Yeah, I'm holding out hope, man. So we hope you come back for us. We're going to be into Children of Men next week, which will be a very different tone. But we enjoy these kind of like more philosophical sci-fi projects every now and then. And I think it's going to be fun. It's going to lead to some really interesting, hopefully, conversation and some deep topics. And I'm excited for it. And we hope you return with us next week for that. All right, man. So thank you for being just enough of a bastard to be worth knowing. And until next time.
To the world.
To the world.